It's like if your video sucks and no one clicks on it, they didn't see you suck. So pitch, just throw it, man.
The thinnest pancake in the world still has two sides. And so like, you're like, nobody's going to see it. It's like, yeah, but you sucked and nobody saw it. So yay, you know?
Clinic owners, would you like to boost your clinic's revenue by $290 per patient per quarter? Of course you would. Physiotech and their remote therapeutic monitoring can allow you to do that. They help you do that to make it nice and easy and streamlined. You provide better patient outcomes. You ease provider workload and turbocharge your earnings. It sounds like win-win-win. It is win-win-win. Find out how to do this simply at physiotech.ca. That's physiotech.ca. Where's your PT career taking you? It's not a rhetorical question. It's a literal question. Where the heck are you going? Embark on extraordinary patient care adventures with Jackson Therapy Partners at their website, jacksontherapy.com. It's perfect for the PT eager to make their mark and take that license and decide where their career goes. Again, jacksontherapy.com. And the thing that you interact with probably most outside of maybe your own personal cell phone as a PT is your EMR. You could revolutionize your practice with MW Therapy's all-in-one outpatient PT EMR. Experience seamless integration of patient portals, marketing automations, and billing, all at an unbelievable value. Switching over is a breeze as well. That can be a headache sometimes. MWtherapy.com. Go kick the tires and take a test drive. On the show today, I'm excited for this one. This is one of those, not that I don't love all my guests equally. Of course I do. But this was fun where I'd never met the guest. We'd interacted briefly online, and I was like, I can learn from this guy. And we're going to talk to Joey Rossi. A great conversation about his journey, first as a springboard diver. And if you watch the video feed of this, he doesn't look like a springboard diver, right? Don't judge a book by its cover. Springboard diver battling back pain and found an unconventional solution to this back pain in lifting some heavy things, powerlifting. And this was also happening while he was, going through the sort of transition of becoming a physical therapist. His story's like just a really cool testament to the leaning into the challenge and finding a solution instead of cowering to it. We talk about not only his personal story, but as a practitioner and his sort of outside the box sort of model, which is kind of cool. So Joey Rossi, PT, springboard diver, power lifter, just overall innovative guy, is on the PT Pintcast right now. Joey, good to talk to you, man. I want to get your backstory. So even before PT school, or was it before PT school? Were you a power lifter before you went to PT school?
I kind of actually, funny enough, became a power lifter in PT school. It was one of the head of my program, the chair, was a PT, and he's the one who told me to do it. So
he told you what, become a power lifter?
Yes. And he told me to do that because I was a diver, like springboard diving.
Oh, and okay.
My back was always hurting. Didn't really think anything of it. I kind of just thought that's how it always was. Ended up getting like fully checked out and found out I had a spondylolisthesis. So I had a spondy. And I'm sitting there, you go through the terrible realm of the medical world and they put the fear of God in you. I'm like, dude, it's not that bad. Like I can still do things I want. Like it's just, it hurts. And he was like, you should do powerlifting. And I'm like, what? Everybody's like telling me I need to do yoga, never lift anything, and it was polar opposite. And I was like, all right. And I kind of got into it. And then it was like in part my stress reliever from PT school, but it was in part how I integrated everything in PT school because I was directly trying to use it. So if we were learning anything about the shoulder or whatever, I was trying to put that into practice. So for me, it was huge. I just happened to I did happen to excel really well at it when I was like competing. And then kind of after PT school kind of like fell off a cliff type thing. Competing.
I think a lot of people, myself included, will look at sports and assume we know what goes into it. And I had a classmate who was like a competitive gymnast. I had a roommate who was a, collegiate baseball player. I had a buddy that I swam. I was a swimmer. Oh, and my buddy on the first day of swim team, when the diving coach was like, who wants to be a diver? I was like, that's insane. He was like, I'll do it. And then he wound up getting a full ride to college. I was like, one of us was smart and the other one was me. But so diving it's really hard on your body, man. Like in terms of when you miss, like there's a lot of torque that goes into that body. Or when you hit the board, for Christ's sake.
I hit my head on the board actually at one time. Diving is the hardest thing I've ever done. They're
Really?
like,
Yeah.
it doesn't even compare. The core strength and control you need, especially when you're flipping and twisting at the same time. It's absolutely wild. Um, you need so much. It's funny enough, I was kind of like your crazy friend who was smart, but I fell into it because I went out for the diving team because I lost a bet. And they're
Uh,
like, and it was just like some girls like, you have to go out the diving team. And I was like, all right. So I figured I'd go there, and then found out I was just crazy enough to do anything. And
yeah.
then I ended up getting going to where I went to Finley's because I went there on scholarship too.
I think you have to be able to turn off like part of your brain that says don't do that. Like,
Yeah,
you know what I mean? Like
yeah,
because if you half-ass it, that's when you get hurt. When you
yeah,
sort of maybe put the brakes on, that's when you get hurt. So my buddy taught me a few dives, and like the thing, it was just doing a regular basic back dive that he's like, if you pull up, if your chin comes down, he's like, you got to look backwards. If your chin comes down, you're gonna land flat. If you do what I say, you'll do it. But if you do 99% of what I say, you will not do it. So
yeah,
like just you got to wrap your head around that. Then you start to when you're spinning 1, 2 times, 3, and then twisting 1/2, all those things. I'm like
yeah.
and when you have somebody who makes it look easy, you're like, well, how hard could that be? And I remember just being like, go give that a shot and let me know afterwards how hard that is.
It's
Oh,
some tough stuff.
what was your favorite dive? What'd you dig?
Like that I competed or just like I enjoyed doing.
Both.
My favorite that I liked, I think, well, my favorite was a 3.5 somersault.
Wow. It's
So
wild,
three and a
man.
half tuck position. And I like doing it because not many people could do it. And it was just
Yeah.
kind of cool. But probably the one that I did the best that always scored me the most was a 2.5 pike. So
Wow.
for now in high school, you could only compete on the 1 meter, and then in
Right.
college you could do 3 meter, which is the
3 meter,
high
right.
dive, and this is the springboard.
Right.
But I always liked the 1 meter. I just always got used to it. I didn't
Yeah.
like the high.
Because I swam for 4 years, I got really good at because if you're in a high school swim meet, everything stops at the swim meet
Yeah,
for I think it's like the sixth or seventh event, and then they dive, and depending on how many divers there are, if it's a dual meet or a tri meet, it could be like a long time. But I got really good at being able to predict scores because if you watch, I mean, that's what like people. That's what like Malcolm Gladwell will say, like with Blink. He's
yeah.
like, how do you get good at something? It's like just watch it or do it over and over and over and over and over again to where if you're a basketball coach, you don't even need to see anything beyond the shooter's hand. You're like, that's going to go in. That's not going to go in. So I got really good not being a diver, but being able to be like, that's good. That's going to be a this. That's going to be a this. Just because it was nothing else. We didn't have phones back then. You had to
Yeah,
watch diving.
that's the craziest thing. A lot of my craziest dives and like powerlifting, like, you didn't have phones like you did today. You had to pull out the old camera. I
Oh
used a
yeah.
GoPro on some things. Like, I mean, it was just wild. But I hated those. I absolutely hated performing, and they were always like, "Everybody be quiet," and it's
Right.
dead silent. Talk about like the most nerve wracking thing that you.
Sure.
Yeah, it
And
was
you're about to
terrible.
do something that you're supposed to have total focus on. All right. So how did powerlifting did it help diving or it was a transition after you were sort of, you were a diver?
So it was a full transition. I got out of diving because I was kind of like managing the back pain. And I was like kind of getting into lifting a little bit, but I didn't fully like take the plunge until I was on the high dive. And I remember I was doing, it was a 1080. So 3 full twist during she wanted me to do it during a 2.5. So 2.5 forward flip, and then, but also spin 3 times in the process. And I really wasn't ready for it. And kind of like what you're saying, like if you're not ready to commit, you can get really injured.
Right.
Well, I wasn't really there. And when I went in, it ripped my arm back
Yeah.
so hard. I knew it was done. And there had been a couple times before that it was like kind of like not happy. And it just happened. And I just looked at her and I was just like, I'm done. I'm just done with it. Like, and I was just done. And so I ended up getting like a slap tear and everything. And I went back, saw my professor, because you really can't afford going to see like healthcare or anything when you're in college and you have no money
Right.
anyway.
Ironically.
And he was just like, don't let anybody operate on it. Do powerlifting like I told you. Like get in, get really strong, and then eventually like do that. And so I ended up I trusted the guy and I just took the leap and I just went into it full fledged.
So all right, so you transitioned from diving to powerlifting, and now explain to me what you get to do as a physical therapist. Who do you get to work with and work alongside?
Right now,
Yeah.
so believe it or not, I actually don't treat many powerlifters anymore because
Okay.
you kind of go through like ebbs and flows. I've been doing this now going, nearly 10 years. And you kind of get like ebbs and flows of wherever you're like,
Sure.
man, I'm doing so much. You feel like you're treating a lot of the same things. So you want something either more complex or more simple or whatever. Right now, I do, it's kind of like a mix. I really get most people that I'm treating now are, well, let me back up. I do things differently. We treat some in person, but we have a whole lot hybrid. And what I mean by that is we have like an app that we use. We manage everything. Think of like a coach and a physical therapist managing everything that you're doing from afar. Okay, so I do a little bit of both. So the people that want more in-person touch, obviously I'm doing more of that. The people who are like, listen, show me what I need to do. I can do it. I
I do
can
it
follow
myself.
along. Do that. So you kind of have the spectrum. Now, I really work a lot now with like the complex cases. I get a lot of referrals from other PTs or other, people that have like, or either physicians and such that are like, look, we've tried whatever. Can you help? And so started getting all these like more complex things. And then later that kind of went into like seeing some men's pelvic health and things like that. So it's like, honestly, I don't really have one. It's like, it's a vast assortment. Right now, I think what I'm enjoying the most at this moment is a lot of like car accidents and motor vehicle accidents.
Really? Why?
They're complex.
Yeah.
I think just right now, like some of the more simple things, like I find myself getting to a point that I'm just like, you just have to do this and then this and work on this. Like you'll be golden. It'll take you, 6 weeks. Like it sounds crazy, but it's like it's almost become some things become so plain Jane vanilla that you're like, you feel like you're just running in the same place all the time. Does that make sense? And like I feel like as clinicians, we're constantly geared towards growth. You
Yeah.
know?
Well, the brain craves novelty, right? Which
Yeah.
is like if you read any like Seth Godin, he summed it up with the story of the purple cow. And if you haven't
Mhm.
heard it, just go Google that.
Yeah.
And that is a funny thing. Is like, and then there also is the other end of the spectrum, where when things are so novel and things are coming at you for a long time and they're super complex, you want a little palate cleanser, and you're like, just where's a total knee? Just give me like 50 total knees in a row. Don't talk to me. I know what to expect, and then your brain will get bored again, and you'll be
Yeah.
like, give me something I need to think. I need to stretch my brain, but that's normal.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think it's just that pendulum swinging.
Yeah, it's ebbs and flows, and you know what? I mean, I think if anything, people need to hear that from other people, because I think we're trained from second grade you go to third grade, and third grade you go to fourth grade, and fourth grade you go to fifth grade, and then you get a job, and then you get promoted, and then you get promoted again,
Yeah.
and it's like just because you're getting promoted doesn't mean that's the right direction you want to go in.
Yeah.
Where I was in radio, I was running a radio station. I was actually running two radio stations, and I was on the air. And to me, I didn't want to go any higher, because going higher meant I probably wasn't going to be on the air, or I wasn't going to be as much, and I was going to be in a boardroom more than a studio. But if you talk to anybody in radio, it was like, well, dude, you're good. So go get promoted, go get more money, and go do more things. But
Right.
I was like, that's not right for me.
Yeah.
So I think some people need to hear like, well, if I'm a really good clinician, then I should probably be a director.
Mm-mm.
It's like, well, do you want, that's a different job.
Yeah.
Just
Right.
because I mean, I've seen like friends of mine who were in nursing in hospitals, and they'll tell me about their managers. And they're like, she's a really good nurse. And I was like, I know, but I asked you, like, is this person a good manager? She's a great nurse. She knows her stuff. I go, is she a good manager?
Mm-hmm.
Right. So it's like, you're a really good diver. Does that mean you're any good at field hockey? It's like, well, no, obviously those are two different sports.
Right.
Director or manager is way different than doer of the thing. And I don't think anybody tells you that,
That's
or they
also one of
should.
those things that it's like, sometimes like people can always tell you what you need to do and what's right, but like you also have to experience it for yourself to
You
find
have
out
to.
the reality. And
Yeah.
that's kind of like what I see with that. Like people are always like, oh, they're going to be great. I'm like, it's a whole different skill set.
It
Not saying
is.
they can't, but it's not a one-to-one direct correlation, kind of like we were
Well,
saying.
people knock teachers, right? There's that line like people who can't do teach. It's like, well, teaching is a skill set, and just because you can do doesn't mean you can teach. In fact,
Yeah.
those two things are very very different. And one can, and that's also like from a business owner standpoint. You mentioned you see people in person or you see people remotely. Those are two different skill sets. Because I
Very
imagine when you're there in person, it's very much well, I'm going to say there's a lot of parallels. There's similarities and differences, right? Like, walk me what from your point of view, if you're seeing two people with a similar condition, one virtually and one in person, what are the similarities and what are the differences from your, like, in terms of skills you need to have and employ?
The biggest skill you need to have is your ability to communicate, convey a message, and also pick up on their cues. Because
Huge.
if you're in a conversation with somebody, you have verbal and nonverbal communication, right? And so if you can't, so that like the words that are being said, they estimate is only like 7%. Then you have the
7%. That's right. Yep.
nonverbal and verbal is the other 93, virtually split even, or depending on whoever you
Yeah,
listen.
there's verbal, nonverbal, and paraverbal.
Okay, well, don't add another variable to
Well,
me.
hold on. But verbal is what you say. Nonverbal is like body language, eyebrows, face, and paraverbal is how you say. If I was like, I'm going to need you to go home and do 3 sets of 10, or hey, man, I'm going to need you to go home and do 3 sets of 10.
Yeah.
That difference is that paraverbal.
Okay, so I just call that like tonality.
Yeah.
But yeah, okay. So when you're with somebody, like face to face, you can pick up on that. But
Tons.
when you're not and you're remote, because sometimes not everything's even an audio message or a video message, sometimes it's just written. So you have to
Wow.
be very clear on what you're going to say, but also more importantly, setting expectations on the front end and letting them know what to expect. And the best way to be a great with helping people remotely is when it kind of becomes so plain Jane vanilla to you that you already know the like the obstacles they're going to have before they have them. And the best thing is you can do, you don't need to tell them about it. You just clear them out of the way. So they
Right.
never even notice them. That's the main skill that you need. And the best way to do that from the skill level, you just got to be really good at it. But outside of like what they do, there should really be no difference. I mean, you could say any hands-on versus non, but like you shouldn't have to be relying on your hands to get somebody better. I'm not
Right,
saying
but
you
you were
should.
also saying, hey, listen, some people don't need it or they don't want it. Like, so if you're like, well, this is the only way I do it, they're like, okay, well, I don't want that, so I'm just going to go see someone else.
Mhm.
And if you're, but also on the flip side, if you're not excited about doing it that way, you probably shouldn't be either. Like if you're like,
Yeah.
I want to be in the room with someone. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think that's great if you recognize that in yourself.
Right, right.
So it really is knowing what I mean, it really boils down to just understanding what you want. Cause ironically, you get good at the things you like. That's
Yeah.
just what we do, right? I mean, I wish I had my first radio shows recorded still. Kids, we were using a thing called cassette tape. We'll talk about that later. But no doubt I was horrible, but I
Mhm.
wanted to do it so bad that I was willing to be horrible. And I hate to break it to people. Like there is talent, right? We talk
Yeah.
about like LeBron was
Sure.
born more talented than Jimmy McKay at basketball. But if it didn't work, that hard work beats talent when the talent doesn't work hard. So I mean, if you want it, I mean, I think that's one message I get from you is like if you know what you're doing and you like it, like you can go pretty far.
Yeah, absolutely. You know what you were just saying, it reminded me. I saw a segment with Ed Sheeran where people were saying, "Oh, but you're like kind of born more that talented," and he's like, "No." And he actually had clips of him when he was like, I don't know, 14, 15, 16, and it sounded like a train wreck.
Yeah.
It just like it didn't sound that great. And he's like, kind of what you said. He had the perseverance. He really wanted to do it, and he put in the work and the effort to get there. And obviously, it's paid off for him now.
Paid off pretty good for Ed Sheeran.
Mhm.
When you were treating pelvic floor, so you at one point though you were treating male patients with pelvic floor issues.
Yeah, I still do. Funny enough, I actually got into it from powerlifting. It was that segment of working with a lot of powerlifters. So when you work with powerlifters, and I'm going to say for mostly the males right now, you end up seeing a lot of adductor strains, knee pains, back pains. Those are like your most common. But what I found is I recognize this from my own history of back pain and such, of how important bracing really is, core bracing. And I
Okay.
don't think the vast majority of people know how to do it correctly. They're not taught correctly. And worse, you see people on Instagram and such teaching it incorrectly. And what I really came down to finding was there was this consistency with seeing a lot of the lifters not bracing correctly, but was ultimately leaving them with down the chain problems. Whether, like I said, whether it's adductor, hip, back, knee, doesn't matter. They were just left with these other problems. And then it was just like trying to reel them in and let them know, like, guys, let's bring this back down to the basement floor, teach you how to brace. And I promise you, like, indirectly, all of these things will get better. Like, yes, we're still going to have to rehab your adductor strain or whatever. But once we get that, like, taken care of, if we actually fix the root cause, this won't happen again. And you'd see a lot of that. Well, the main difference that you see with men versus women, especially in the lifting world, when it comes to pelvic floor, is men, we have prostate. And that is another barrier of defense from us leaking or sharding when you are squatting. Women are far more likely to be leaking when they're squatting, and people can recognize it because visually they can see, oh, there's a problem. Well, with men, we just have that block because we have the prostate, which is like a second like kink to the system. But doesn't mean the main issue is still not there. You just don't see it. And so, I mean, I guess the easiest way to think for like a guy, if you see guys that are, put it this way, if anybody's squatting and they're farting and passing gas when they're squatting, they've lost the brace by default. Like, you've lost the brace, and the part of the brace in that case would be the pelvic floor. Now, there's levels of it, right? And at the end of the day, I started getting more into it, and I was starting helping people with like core bracing. And that was for a while. That's all I did. It seemed like I was just helping people with like back pain or whatever. And it was just like around the core and core bracing. And then you kind of have an understanding of why somebody's maybe leaking, and like women, why they're leaking. And I remember I was seeing a friend's girlfriend, and I told her, I was like, look, I think I have an idea what's going on. I'm not going to like do anything internal. I'm not going to go down that route, but I can walk you through. And I referred her to a pelvic PT. The pelvic PT said, just stop doing lifting. And I'm like, well, that's silly. Like,
Yeah.
you might have to bring it down a little bit, but to like catapult you forward, but like you shouldn't have to fully stop. So I ended up like kind of walking her through and teaching her how to do some stuff. And then it kind of led to like one thing of another. She's like, well, I actually know this guy who's having some other issues too. Do you think you could see him? And for him, it was a common thing. Like, I think with him, it was like SIBO. So SIBO is kind of like leaking, rectal leaking, if you will. Okay. And so you're like, well, I'm not like fully trained on that side of things, but you just slowly make one transition to another. And at the time, I kind of needed CEUs, and I was just like, well, there's nothing really I'm interested in. So I actually was like, I'll just go do this like pelvic floor course. And man, as a male treating men, your career is paved. If any guy listening to me now, if they're young, don't know what they want to do or want to change it, if you're like, I don't really know, if you want a career that is wide open, blue ocean, completely paved, and you're a male treating men, so wide
Is
open.
it because there aren't enough?
It's not enough, and there's a lot of men with pelvic floor dysfunctions that don't want to see women. And I say
Oh.
that because historically people come see a therapist because they're in pain, right? Something is painful. Pelvic floor, things generally aren't painful, but it is shameful. And they have a hard
Mhm.
time wanting to talk to women about it. Now, some are like, no, I'd rather only see women. And that's okay. Now, that does take the opposite of, well, you also have like pelvic pain. But all the guys that I've seen, a lot of them have seen women in the past and like they've been great. I felt like there's some things I couldn't fully open up with her, or just felt kind of either timid, or you just feel like you're tense a little bit, a little anxious. And I think just being a guy, you can have more of that like locker room talk, that like kind of just brings that edge off, that can just
Right.
calm everything a little bit more like down.
Yeah. So big demand, but not a huge supply of people who are treating that. So
Oh no, it's not uncommon to get somebody to drive 2 hours one way.
wow,
Like, not at
because
all.
it matters.
Yeah. Like,
When you have that, it's a big deal.
oh yeah. Gosh, we get like telehealth or consults, phone calls from all over the country. And you're just like, well, I can't like fully help you. I can put you in the right direction. Like, I don't care. I want to work with you. And it's like, well, okay. some things are just hard, but I'm telling you, like any guy who's, I mean, of course women too, but if it's so like lower supply of men treating men, and there is a huge, huge need for it as well.
Yeah. So big need.
Oh yeah.
And if you're, I mean, I'm imagining is it rarely straightforward? Is it pretty complex? So it could be challenging too, right?
So both.
Yeah.
It's funny because you talk to sometimes, like we've had students come and shadow and they want to see what it's like. And the thing you have to tell them, the hardest thing about men's pelvic floor is a conversation. 100%. 100% having that conversation and being able to have that conversation. At the end of the day, the pelvic floor, what it does, number one, it holds your innards in, okay? It holds everything in. Then it helps with bowel, bladder, and sexual function or dysfunction. And that obviously is a whole skew of things. It's how you treat every single pelvic floor dysfunction, every single one, no matter what. Doesn't even matter if male or female. You have a pyramid, okay? The bottom pyramid, the bottom layer, there's three, is habits. Bowel habits, bladder habits, sexual habits. The middle pyramid is the pelvic floor. So think of like the bicep. Does it have the full range? Does it have the strength, the endurance? And then the top part is integration. And that's where you integrate your pelvic floor to your spine and using it correctly throughout the day. So as far as treating it, is it hard? Generally, it's pretty simple. So much so that like a prostatectomy, we kind of give it it's the knee replacement of pelvic rehab. That's what we call it. Like a post prostatectomy, so simple. Like there's not like crazy hurdles to sit there and think about like how complex or crazy it is. Now, then you have pelvic pain, which in the pelvic world they call the redheaded stepchild because it's like wild. It's like a snowflake. Everyone is different, and that's where the complexity comes into play.
So we talked about communication one-to-one, right? Like therapist to patient or therapist to client.
Okay.
What about, you create content to make sure people understand who you can help. Mm-hmm. How is that transition? How do you like, wrapping your head around that? Because that can be, in my mind, simple, but never necessarily easy.
To create content?
To create content that resonates anyway, right? Because we could create stuff all day. But again, we got to make sure that we're pointing it at the right person, giving them the right message, and that they're going to hopefully do something with it. And that's usually a call to action.
It's funny. We have that's the thing that I always fall off the bandwagon really quick, whether it's because it got hard or because my schedule fills up so fast. There's a massive wait list. Like it's crazy. I don't know. To answer your question, I really don't know. And I'll tell you why. I have spent so many hours trying to learn the skills of talking in front of a camera, editing, putting out content, being more creative. Some of the stuff that I've put out that you think is going to be hit the interwebs and go everywhere, it's like dud. And then I have I know. And then I have one video on YouTube, and it was talking about, helping guys get an erection after a prostatectomy. And what's crazy is I remember being I probably shouldn't say this. I was so frustrated and annoyed because at the time, I don't remember what happened, but I was really annoyed of the content. I was annoyed about something, and I was going to create content on it. But then I kept messing up. And then I remember just taking, I think I actually just took a bunch of shots before, and I was like, I'm just getting through this. And I just was probably a little lit, but it was probably like 1 o'clock in the morning. It's probably one of the worst videos I've ever done from like a media standpoint.
Right.
And it's got the most views. Like none of mine are crazy. It's only it's got 60,000 views, but I'm like,
it's a lot.
Well, it took 400. It took 400 days after I posted it. I forgot all about it. And it was just, so now one of my goals for 2024 is I was like, all right, kind of like what you're saying. I have got to sit down and think, how do you go from this? How do you start producing content where you can start speaking to more people? Because there's a lot of fun in it, especially when you're not when you're trying to just share your experience and have a little creative spin on it. There is some fun to it.
Sure.
To where you can help people without having to actually be one-on-one. And so a one-on-one versus a one-to-many, the conversation is different. And you kind of have to, that's one thing I'm trying to learn as practice and learn right now is try to speak to more people at once rather than just one-to-one. One-to-one I feel pretty good at now.
Right. Yeah. I think the trick is you don't ever actually speak one-to-many. Like you're always like I'm talking to Joey right now. I'm hoping that someone is listening. But if I try to make something for 10 people, I'm going to miss.
Yeah.
But if I'm just like, I want to get, and that's where like, I remember a professor asked me when I was like a year into the podcast, because I was still a PT student because we graduated the same year. We graduated in 16. And she was like, she wasn't being mean about it, but she's like, what's your goal here? And I was like, oh, that's a good idea. Because so far, you know, I was just like, I don't know, do it because it's fun or whatever, which powered me through, right? And then I had to like, she's like, well, I think like maybe be strategic. And I was like, oh. And then I think I overthought it. And then I finally came back to, I want to have fun and learn one thing with every episode. Because I figure if I learn one thing, someone listening, it might not be the same thing, ironically, too. Because you might have said 10 things that I know and one that I don't know. But that might be 6 things someone didn't know and 9 things they did, you know? So I think if you have really good conversations, there's time and places for presentations. There are. And that's where I give people an example of like TED Talk versus streaming.
Yeah.
You're going to prepare a TED Talk for 7 months and you're going to do it 78 times. And then that's a 17-minute thing. That's a presentation. And what I used to do was more streaming. This was in the moment, right? Every once in a while when I was on the radio, I was funny. Every once in a while. But fun is scalable. Fun is like it's mood, right? Kevin Hart takes 12 months to write a 2-hour special because he knows every time he inhales and exhales, funny's going to come out. So what I try to get people to remember is like, I need you to just have fun, learn, have fun, share, have fun, teach something. Because people just want to like ingest stuff that like makes them feel good, right? Because they don't expect you to just machine gun out ha-has all the time. But if it's like, okay, this is digestible and I'm learning a couple things. And the best part is with YouTube anyway, they know what they're getting if you write the right title.
So a lot of what you just said is a lot like took me a lot of aha moments.
Yeah.
Okay. Like the whole idea of not everything has to be a presentation and presentation for streaming. I didn't recognize that until I was like in it. You know, some people say like you do a lot of content in the beginning, it doesn't matter because you're trying to find your voice. You're going to find how you talk and everything. And like, I'm in some ways so analytical and I'm like very much organizational, like planning and everything that like I sometimes wouldn't let myself go through those hurdles to realize it. And then later you look back, you're like, holy crap, I could have done this 2 years earlier.
You got to go through the valley of suck.
Yes, you do. And you learn so much, you know, like there's only so much you can read and learn from a book or from somebody else. Like most of learning happens, you know, it's like you can't learn to drive from a computer screen. Like at the end of the day, you got to get behind the wheel, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. The idea is, and someone will tell me who said this and so I can give them credit, but school has it backwards because first they give you the lesson, then the test. But in life, you're tested and you learn the lesson from the test. Yeah. So it's like we actually have it 180 degrees backwards. And when I'm helping people or companies launch podcasts or videos or anything, I whisper to them when I have a good rapport. When I know I can say it, I go, "Your first 20 are going to suck anyway, so who cares?" And like some people, what do you mean they're going to suck? I'm like, to be honest, they're going to suck in your mind, but only compared to your next 80.
Yeah.
Because you're going to grow so much from 0 to 20 that 21 through 100, you're going to be like, God, I was so terrible. But I'm like, yeah, but your first 20 were great compared to, number one, the people that never started. You're infinitely better than the people that didn't start. And because I think someone threw a statistic, it was Edison Research, who like does like radio and TV and podcasting. If you share podcast episode number 10, you're in the top 1% of podcast creators. And I was like, I need you to check that math. It doesn't make any sense. But there's the pyramid so wide on the bottom of people who start and don't get past number 9 that just getting to 10 puts you in the top 1%. It's wild.
It's so funny you say that because people always tell me I'm crazy for this, but like when I find a new YouTuber or YouTube channel and I'm looking at their newest content or whatever, what I instantly do if I'm ever impelled to go to their channel,
sure,
I always go and find their videos and find the very first thing they upload, and I always want to compare. I do. I don't know why.
That's a good idea.
To me, I like doing it and see. Wow, look how much they've grown. And there are some people that it's wild that like, wow, they were they didn't convey messages really well. And maybe it's
And
their
look at them
editing
now.
changed or whatever. And just seeing that growth, and then sometimes, and then like as soon as you see that, look at the time frame, and you see some that I'm like, that's 10 years ago.
Yeah, yeah,
Most
yeah.
people don't stick with stuff for 3 months, yet alone 10
Correct.
years. And
Correct.
sometimes I like try to go back to reality, because I think we all have been TikTokified in this recent years of like thinking everything's going to happen like this. Trust me, I'm no different. And my
Yep.
wife and I, we found ourselves getting like that. So we started writing down like goals, everything, like whether it was like financial, fitness, you name it. And we just like looked at like just at the end of the month, and we just started hitting like our KPIs, whatever they were, right? Whatever. And then you look back and you're like, dude, I feel like nothing happened. It's like, well, we just actually opened it up. Like, well, actually, look how much has actually changed in the past
Yeah.
year. But when
But
you're
if you don't
living
track
it,
it,
yeah, when you're living it, it just seems like it's just so minor each day, you know?
right? Yeah. The funny part is you're talking about going back and looking like at really good YouTubers, right? Because then you can see this growth. The funny part is people always ask me, what kind of microphone is that? What kind of camera is that? What kind of lights are that? And I used to just be like, don't worry about it. And now I lean back in and I go, I understand why you're asking me that. And I will give you a PDF of all the things. I'll give you free $100 and $1,000. And then you choose what your budget is, because I don't want to go into that. But
I
I'm
was
like,
that guy.
you're that guy. But I'm
I
like, do you want,
was.
but you know, the repetitions are the thing that will actually give you the best ROI. There's
I
a
think
basement,
yeah.
like you can't use a microphone that goes shh, right. So like I'll tell you, there's a Yeti Blue microphone, $80. It's all you need. Now the difference between that and there you go, right there. The difference between that and the one I've got is $100 and 3% sound or whatever. It's minuscule. But if you don't use the damn thing, it's like how much were your bumper plates and how much was your bar? But if you don't lift them, it doesn't matter if it's any better.
Yeah. It's funny because you learn a lot of these things in hindsight, where I
You
was a
do.
person that you find the excuse.
Yep.
And part of it is because something internally, and this is only my own thoughts because this was me, but like something internally was keeping you from like taking that leap. And so when you weren't ready to accept, you weren't ready internally or to say something, you found something else to give the blame of the circumstance. It's like, I gotta have this microphone or this or that. And don't get me wrong, if you're trying to be a creator, the audio is the number one thing. Get the audio first. Like personally,
Correct. I
it's
agree.
better to the ear. But
Yep.
then after that, like you said, it's minuscule at this point. Like just little bit of percentages here and there, you know?
Like everything I'm talking to you right now on, $1,200, but I've been doing this for 8 years. So if you're like, hold on a second, $1,200, maybe $1,500, right? Over 8 years, that's a couple $100 a year, right?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know there's a ton I could add right now that's going to put enough razzle dazzle to make crappy content better. It won't. But so I've done more than 1,200 podcast episodes, and I go through. It's funny how you're talking about ebbs and flows versus sometimes you want complex, and sometimes you want this, and sometimes you're just like, I like this for a long time, and I don't want to do that anymore. I get caught up in that too, which is as soon as I thought about doing more YouTube stuff, I thought everything had to be like, ask Joey a question. He's got to have a banger of an answer. And then as soon as he's done, I need to throw an even better question at him. And it's got to be bang, 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 bang. And then I realized I hated doing that because that's not how real conversation is. Sometimes it takes 5 minutes to get great. And then I thought, well, then I need to over edit. I need to spend like 2 hours editing every episode. And then I never released anything because I had a pile of stuff I didn't want to edit. And then I realized, hey, man, remember what got you here. And it's turn a microphone on, have fun, learn one thing, publish it. And there's my secret. If anybody wants to steal my blueprint, it's get $100 microphone and do it over and over and over again. Ta-da!
You know, I could cringe right now because everything you just said, realize like when some people sell their audience or an audience that they are missing something, they're doing just that. They're selling you on a solution. That's their incentive. That's their goal. And the crazy thing is, years ago, I didn't want to be this big. I didn't think I could be that funny on like a camera or whatever. I thought the camera would make me camera shy. And so at one point I actually wanted to do a podcast, and I actually got talked out of it. I wanted to do what you were saying. Now I wouldn't nearly be this clever to talk about PT over beer, but there was a mentor I had that actually talked me out of it and talked me into, but you don't have the right stuff. You need to make sure it's like essentially over edited and everything. And then like, of course at the time you like trust them, but then like you look back and you're like, man, this person was only saying that because that was a way they, at the end of the day, they were selling their editing services. They
Oh,
were,
that's what it was.
that's where it was leading. You know what I mean?
Got it.
And so it's kind of like knowing at the end of the day, going to your grassroots and everything. And I wish I would have done it. It's always hindsight.
Right.
Like, you don't find many people that say, I wish I wouldn't have started that podcast 2 years ago.
Yeah, but the best part was, I remember because I started midnight to 6 a.m. That's where you really start in radio. Like Friday, Saturday nights, midnight to 6 a.m. No one's listening to the radio then. Or they are, but they're hammered, which is a great audience because they will tell you when you're dumb and when you're not. But the best part was, I remembered I was trying to do a couple of bits or do whatever, do some funny phone calls. And I was in a radio building where there were 4 radio stations live at the same time. So I had 3 other counterparts, but one was in country, one was in oldies, and one was in classic rock. And I was in alternative rock. So we could talk on theory without ever having any of our bands cross over. And I remember I was pitching this idea kind of over a cup of coffee or whatever and seeing what their reaction was. And the one woman was just like, if it sucks and no one listens, no one heard you suck. And I was like, that is such a safety net. It's like, if your video sucks and no one clicks on it, they didn't see you suck. Yeah. So pitch, just throw it, man.
Man, it's crazy. It's just like there's always 2 sides. No matter the thinnest pancake in the world sells 2 sides. And so you're like, nobody's going to see it. It's like, yeah, but you sucked and nobody saw it. So yay,
So now you know what not to do, but then diagnose, why'd that suck? Oh, dude, man, there was no punchline in that joke, or where was the funny, or it took too long to get there. It's like, okay, take that lesson and then realize that and be like, hey, man, remember that time you felt goofy because it took too long to get to the punchline? Yeah, cut that time in half now because you know that's 10 is too long, 5 is closer to being better. But you only get that. We used CDs. We're talking about cassettes. Now, kids, CDs were like discs that you put in. So we used CDs in the radio studio when I first started. It wasn't all digital MP3s. So we typically had 3 CD players, A, B, and C. And one was obviously always playing. And then the second one was the one you queued up. And the third one was 2 songs from now. But there's all these numbers and lights and flashing. But, you're in a groove and you're doing this and you're answering phones or you're talking and there will come a time. And whenever I train people on the equipment in the studio, I'm like, I look at them right in the eye. There will come a time when you will pop out the CD that is currently playing on the radio and you will go into sheer panic mode because now you don't have a song queued up. You're like, oh, what do I do now? And then blah, 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 blah. And you will go completely white because now you're dead, right? Then it'll take a few seconds and you'll hit play. It will happen. And here's the best part. You will have a shot of adrenaline go through your body. And then every time you go to pop out that CD again in the future, your brain will go, hang on a second. Remember that really bad feeling I had? Am I popping out the right one? But the only way to get that feeling is to screw it up once. And it's got to be live and it's got to be real and it's got to mean something. It's like the first time you go to pull out from a stop sign when there's a truck coming and you panic because you're in the intersection. But the only way to get a kid to recognize that is they kind of got to do that. You hope they learn the lesson and they don't get T-boned is what we're saying. Right. But that's for content creation and that's for talking to a patient and that's for being on the radio or driving or making a souffle or a pancake. That's just the way we're dumb animals. And we have to learn that way. That's just how we're hardwired, but accept that and then move past it. And I think you're better than 90% of the people out there.
Yeah, absolutely. You gotta get through the valley of suck. Is that what you
valley of suck, man? Yeah. And I think it's Seth Godin, who's a great writer, says he wrote a book called The Dip, where he's like, in any project, there's this initial excitement and it's fun. And then as you start to go on, problems happen and things get a little less fun. And he's like, it's such a misnomer that winners do quit. They just know what to quit on. But they go long enough to get enough information to go, I don't see this being fun enough for me to go through that valley of suck. So I'm going to dip on this, but not everything. Right. But that's okay. Right. So I don't know. I'm a F around, find out kind of guy in good ways. I don't know. Let's find out. I mean, Tony Maritato started leaned on me so many times to start on YouTube, but I was like, what I do doesn't translate. He goes, how do you know? And I was like, I don't know. And he just kept pushing. And now it's it's translating. Am I the most famous YouTuber in the world? No. Was I expecting to be? Also no. But if you can land with enough people and you have fun doing it, to me, it's fulfilling.
I have the greatest respect for Tony. That man has pushed. I've seen so many people online that I've seen get pushed to get started on things and do things because of
Yeah.
him. And what's crazy is I look at his content and I don't think wow anytime I look at it ever. And
No.
I that's not mean.
He
It's
says that though.
what?
He says that. He's like, my stuff isn't a $4,000 camera. But look at the results. That's the thing you say wow at.
Right. And that's the big thing is like for me, seeing him have the success, if this does this for anybody, because it did for me, is it gave me permission that, man, you're right. You don't have to have these crazy cameras or setups to have this success. And he's had great success on a lot of things. I mean, I've actually bought courses from him. Like I love Tony, right? I mean, the guy, like if you ever want to talk to somebody who has like years and years of wisdom and can just bulletproof all of that to you really quick, he's the guy to talk to.
Because he's failed, and he'll admit it, and he fails in public.
Yes, and that's
He'll like
huge.
chronicle his failures.
And a lot of people like to hide their failures.
Correct, me included.
Yeah. Or the one
I had some really big initial success with podcasting. Also, it was a pretty good time to be a podcaster because there were no other podcasters. Like I think there was like 5 physical therapy physical therapy podcasts. So it was like, hey, great, I'm in the top 5. And then I remember hitting that valley of suck where I'm like, I don't know how to grow, but I never asked anybody because I was like, I'm in the top 5. I've been doing this for 3 years. I should know. And that stunted my growth. Had I just been like, I hit a plateau, I don't know what to do. All I would have needed to do is find one person who could challenge me or push me, and I would have grown. But I didn't do that.
Yeah. Yeah. It's
funny
wild.
how
Everything's hindsight 2020, you know?
Yeah. I would agree with everything you said about Tony, except I actually think Tony pulls, not pushes. And I'm being like, minuscule,
Yes.
right?
Yes. Yeah. I would
Because
agree.
he's doing it.
Yes.
Do you know what I mean? Like he's like, follow me he's like, follow me or don't, or follow me. And so I think he's like, I'll be the first person to screw up. And then when somebody does it really well, he's the first person to sort of be like, yeah, look at this. Look at this person.
He pulled me into doing some like blog posts and everything. And I went into it, tried doing it. And honestly, I found for me, the Valley of Suck it wasn't worth getting through.
And that's okay.
I hate writing. I'm
Me
dyslexic.
Too.
I can't write. You put a camera in front of me. Well, cameras kind of make me a little bit more shy, but you put a microphone in front of me, I'm like I can just things can just kind of flow a little bit easier for me.
So what I do now a little bit, and because I've heard enough people like you is, and you might not even know, there's organizations I do this with. I'm completely off camera. I have fake press conferences. So I will use the app we're using now, StreamYard.
Yeah.
And I'll talk to Joey. Joey's like, I need to be more on this or whatever. So I don't share the whole video. Mm-hmm. I'm off camera. I'm the batting practice pitcher. And the more I get to learn you and who you want to talk to and what your goals are, what you have to offer, mm-hmm. I structure my 20 pitches every week, different ones. And I might throw the same pitch 6 different ways, but I'm off camera. So you stop thinking about the camera and the microphone and the audience. You just keep hitting the ball. Right. And what I've found is the really good results come there. And that's really what I tell people that I do is it's 90% psychology, 10% communications. Because my job is to get people comfortable enough to actually share the good shit.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because people they'll know that, oh, this seems very professional and polished. But they're like, the funny thing is the second you're like, you hit the outro and you're like, hey, thanks for coming. You hit stop. The person goes, oh, wow, that was really whatever. Like, no, wait, why weren't you that for 20 minutes ago? But it's hard because this is weird. This is not natural. And I used to tell people that when they'd come on the radio, I'm like, listen, I get it. This isn't natural. This isn't normal. I'm going to make it as normal as possible. And then I'd always like look around like, and if it goes crappy, it's probably my fault anyway, because I'm in charge. Don't worry about it. And that usually reduces the stress by at least 30-40%. But that's
what I did. And maybe this helps somebody else. I actually have a couple tripods around my room that I keep with a camera. It's not actually recording, but
just to get used to it.
Just to being used to it as if it's just a picture frame on the wall.
Yeah.
And it's just there,
Well, Tony said once because right now for the podcast audience, Joey's on one side of the camera or the screen. I'm on the other. So it's like a Zoom screen, right? Vertically split. Tony says it bothers him so much to see himself that he actually takes a Post-it note and puts it on the screen and covers himself up. He even says when he records a video on his phone, he will cover the phone with a Post-it note and then just etch out a little hole for where the front-facing camera is. But he knows himself. So it's like, if that's the thing, if the
Mhm.
0.2 cent Post-it note is going to remove it, or if putting the camera around your office with no memory card in it is going to descent, do it.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. We've been talking longer than I thought. I was like, I'll talk. We'll be 20 minutes, 30 minutes. You
Yeah,
have to do a
for a while.
parting shot. So a parting shot
Okay.
is your mic drop moment, your soapbox save. It can be about anything that we talked about or nothing that we talked about. But what is something that you're like, yeah, this is going to be on my rubber stamp?
How you gonna put me on the spot like that?
You got to know. I do this with every episode.
Who? Yeah, I know. Who's it to? I guess.
Um, how about an older version of you? Because several times during this episode, you're like, man, I wish I just, no one regretted starting.
It would probably be something like that.
Yeah.
If I'm actually in this weird like time in my life where I feel like I have most conversations with my future self or with myself. I'm a twin. So if anybody doesn't know
Ooh.
that. So I feel like I've been kind of talking to we're mirror twins. So we're not like identical, we're like opposites.
What
So
does
like
that mean? Is that a thing?
mirror twin. So like I'm right-handed, he's left-handed. My hair would part this
What?
way, his would go that way. Like we're like mirrors of each other.
Wow. I've never
Yeah.
heard this term.
So I feel like now I have a lot of conversations with like internally, like a psycho, with myself of like when I'm older, and I don't know what prompted this, but like I just think of like when I'm older or when, like as you get older, things, you care about things differently. And I
Yep.
look back like, where am I going to be happy? And what am I going to be happy if have done? And what am I going to regret not doing? You know? And I ended up getting to a point where I even like tattooed it on my arm. And it says, if you're not living on the edge, you're taking up too much space.
Good one.
And really, really just was kind of there to remind me that everybody, like, in order to grow, you got to get uncomfortable. So get comfortable being uncomfortable. That
Yeah.
would really be it.
Yeah. And that's an easy tattoo or a cool thing to post, but it's one of those things where you have to do it. And very few times do people leave the gym and they're like, regret going to the gym. It's like, of course not. Of course you don't regret the results.
Right.
But if you want great things, you got to do difficult things. But the secret, I'll yes and you, is, and I think Tony does that as well. It's not that you don't set a goal. It's that you set an achievable, trackable goal, and you're not saying, I'm going to go be the best YouTuber ever, because if that's easy to miss. But if you're like, I'm going to be better than I was 6 months ago, and honestly, like, know how to measure that, that's trackable.
Right.
And you can figure that out. And we are big dumb animals and we like progress. So give yourself something to measure yourself against. Even better if it's yourself, because I could go measure myself against 50 other people who do the same thing, but they all do it different.
Right.
Yeah.
So what would be your shots of wisdom then?
From this, I remember my buddy who was a diver, and every time you were talking about like doing dives, he would be like, fuck it, chuck it. Like, just do it. Just try it. Just chuck it. Like, we're going to do it 2.5 at what? And I'm like, I don't know. Like, but I didn't have that.
I actually love that. There are times I can look back. So I work for myself now, and it was really hard taking that leap of faith. And looking back, some of the things that I have learned became like the best parts of me that I've learned about myself in the past few years are when I just swung, and just fuck it, chuck it, man.
It's not. I mean, read anybody's, read a biography on somebody who's achieved something.
Yeah.
And do you think everything just goes up and to the right? It does not. It doesn't. Or else it wouldn't have been a cool story. They wouldn't have wrote a book, but they wouldn't have achieved anything, right? I mean, like the whole Steve Jobs book was probably like 400 extra pages than it needed to be. We probably could have thinned that down. It was a big book. But, fails out of school or drops out of school and does this and gets excised from his own company and then comes back and brings it to the top. So you had to eat a little bit of failure. So that's one thing I would say. Joey, they say the best conversations happen at happy hour, man. Thanks for coming to ours. You going CSM?
I wasn't planning on it. Where is it? When is it?
It's in Boston in February, which is
terrible.
That is a horrible. We should do it in Tampa, where you are, anytime. Well, not July. Tampa in February would be a great idea. The reason I'm saying that is we might be throwing up a happy hour, but we'll probably be doing it. I'm actually trying to make a road trip to do some live shows at PT programs in Florida because it's warm there, and that's how I like to roll.
Well, if you come, let me know, and I'll buy you a beer.
That sounds good. Joey, appreciate the time, man.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much for having me on.